Hi, you're watching Cooking with Diane. I'm Diane, and today I'm going to talk about how to make vinaigrette. A classic vinaigrette is a really good staple to have in your cooking repertoire. It's super easy. It uses just a few ingredients that you probably already have in your pantry, and it tastes so much better and fresher than bottled salad dressings. So for tools, you're going to need a bowl and a whisk. If you don't have a whisk, you can even use a fork, especially if you're just making a small amount of dressing. What you put in your dressing is really up to you, but it's a vinaigrette, so one of the ingredients has to be vinegar. It should be a vinegar that you like the taste of. I don't recommend distilled white vinegar because it's really strong tasting and doesn't have much of a flavor beyond sour. I always like balsamic vinegar. That's a good go-to. Red wine vinegar is great, white wine vinegar is great, champagne vinegar is great, rice vinegar is great. Even if you don't have vinegar, lemon or lime juice will work really well as your acidic part of the dressing. Along with the vinegar, we're going to use some kind of oil. You can either use a neutral flavored oil like canola oil or sunflower oil or avocado oil, or you can use olive oil. If you want to use olive oil, just keep in mind that olive oil can be a little bit bitter, so it will make your dressing taste a little bit bitter and olivey. If you want a more neutral flavored dressing, use a neutral oil. These are really the only ingredients you need for a vinaigrette. But if you want to add a little bit more dimension to your vinaigrette, I always like to add a little something sweet just to counteract the sourness of the vinegar. So maple syrup is great, honey is great, even a pinch of actual sugar would work for this. And I also like to add a little bit of mustard. Sometimes I use regular creamy Dijon mustard, and sometimes I use whole grain Dijon mustard. I do recommend Dijon mustard over, say, a yellow mustard or a spicy brown mustard, just because it's going to have the most mild flavor. But again, if you hate mustard, don't use mustard. What mustard will do is add a slight pungency to the dressing, which helps balance the sweetness and the sourness. And it helps make the dressing creamier and thicker. And of course, we're going to use some salt and pepper. Other optional ingredients you could add are a little bit of chopped shallot or some garlic. So when we're making a vinaigrette, we need to think about two things. Number one is the ratio of vinegar to oil. That's the most important part. Old school French style cooking says that you should use 1 part vinegar to 4 parts oil. More modern restaurants and me at home tend to like a more pungent, peppery, vinegary dressing. So I do a ratio of 1 to 2. So that means for every 1 cup of vinegar I use, I'm going to use 2 cups of oil. So just to make sure I get my ratio right, I do like to measure my oil and vinegar out. So I have a 1/4 cup balsamic vinegar in this container and 1/2 cup olive oil in this container. The other ingredients, you don't really need to measure. That's more to taste. The next thing we want to think about when we're making a vinaigrette is emulsification. Emulsification means we're going to force 2 things that don't really like to mix together, that is oil and vinegar, into one creamy, homogeneous mixture. So you can't make an emulsion by just dumping the oil and vinegar together in a bowl and stirring it and calling it a day. You have to really force them together using your whisk. So that's why we measure the oil and vinegar separately. We're going to add the vinegar first, and then we're going to slowly add the oil to it, whisking vigorously the whole time. So I always start by adding my vinegar and then whatever flavorings I like in my dressing to my bowl. And you don't really need a bowl this big, but make sure it's big enough that if you're whisking vigorously, it's not going to splash all over the sides. So in goes my vinegar. And then for this amount of dressing, I'm going to add a tablespoon each of both my maple syrup and my mustard. So that's about a tablespoon. Again, it really doesn't need to be exact. And I'm going to use the creamy mustard for this one. So just a nice big spoonful of that. I'm going to add a pinch of salt to bring out the flavor of everything. And I'm going to add a couple cracks of ground black pepper, just because I like the taste of pepper in my salads, but if you don't like pepper, then don't add it. At this point, if you want to add any chopped shallot or garlic, That'll add some nice pungency to your dressing as well. So I'm going to microplane in some garlic. I really like using a ceramic bowl for this because it's heavy and it'll stay in place while I'm whisking with one hand and pouring with another. If you don't have a ceramic bowl, if you have a lighter plastic bowl and it's kind of turning around while you're trying to whisk it, take a slightly damp kitchen towel and twist it into a circle on your counter to hold your bowl in place. This should hold your bowl in place. You can also use the towel to hold your bowl at an angle, which might make it easier to whisk, especially if you're using a large bowl. So I'm going to slowly pour my olive oil into my vinegar, whisking vigorously the whole time. And I'm going to show you a close-up of what this looks like so you can see. So right now, I have mostly vinegar in my bowl. I've added a little bit of the olive oil, but I still have this much olive oil to add. So I'm going to whisk really vigorously. It's okay if you see bubbles around the edges. That's actually a good sign. While I add the oil, just a little bit at a time. So once you've added all of the oil, it should look lighter in color and have a nice thick viscosity. It should be kind of the consistency of maple syrup rather than the consistency of vinegar. If it's thicker like this and it moves around all as one liquid rather than having pools of vinegar here and pools of oil here, then that means you've created an emulsion. So once you've created your nice emulsified salad dressing, you're not done yet because you still have to taste it. We just added random amounts of maple syrup, mustard, and salt to this. So it's important to taste it to make sure it tastes the way you want it to taste. Now is the time that you can add more salt or more maple syrup or more vinegar or whatever you want to add. Instead of tasting it with a spoon, I like to taste my salad dressings on a piece of lettuce because nobody ever actually eats dressing on its own. We eat it in context over lettuce or grains or whatever. So just shake a small amount onto a piece of lettuce because this is the way you would eat it in a salad. And now you can decide, is it too sweet? Maybe add a little more salt and vinegar. Is it too sour? Maybe add a little more olive oil. Is it too salty? Maybe add a little bit more sweetness. Mine tastes good to me, so I'm going to bottle it up. This will keep in my fridge in any sort of covered container. It can be glass or plastic for, gosh, at least a week. And honestly, I've kept dressings in my fridge for several weeks at least. So it's always okay to make extra dressing and then save the rest. If you used olive oil in your dressing, it might get hard in the fridge. Don't let that worry you. Just take it out 20 minutes before you want to toss your salad and let it come to room temperature so the olive oil will melt again. And that's all I have to say about vinaigrettes. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.